Well, welcome everyone. Hi, I'm Robert Black. I'm the planetarium director and the astronomy teacher at North Medford, and glad you're all tuned in with us for our big webinar tonight. Before I introduce our esteemed guests and fantastic scientists and entrepreneurs, I've got to thank Sean Curry, who's a member of the Southern Oregon Skywatchers, and he helps me mentor students here at North Medford. He's going to be on the question and answer tonight. So if you have a question as our speakers are giving their presentation, please put it in the question for Sean, and he'll pose it to our guest speakers. And then, of course, Mike Maven, if you go to North Medford, you know he's our video productions guy, and thanks to you, Mike, for helping us tonight. But here we go. This is a big night for us. We're calling this webinar The Space Perspective. Our two guests, Tabor and Jane, are dear friends, fantastic members of the space community. Their resume is a mile long. There's no way I could go through it all, but they helped build and design the Biosphere 2, and of course we're in the first crew. Isn't that something? 2 years and 20 minutes? Good old Jane Goodall, right? And then they started Paragon Space Development Corporation, fantastic company, still going today. Lots of great accomplishments of that company. Then, of course, they started doing lots of ballooning. Yeah, with the Worldview, and they hold, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys, but they hold all the high altitude balloon records. If you're into ballooning, these are the gurus here. I've gotten a lot of information from them. And then, of course, now they're out at Cape Kennedy, and their new adventure is the Space Perspective. So let's give a virtual welcome. I know that we can't make a lot of noise, but I know I can. So let's welcome Jane Pointer and Tabor McCallum. Thank you so much. And here they are.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Robert. This is a lot of fun. You know, Robert and I go back. I think we're just cresting on 40 years now. So any students that are looking for a little bit of backstory on Professor Black here, we'll be happy to oblige during the Q&A session.
Oh, good call. You know what? I hadn't quite realized, of course, that Robert, you've known Tabor a lot longer than me. Now I'm a little jealous.
It's not like that. We're just very dear friends, right?
Well, so we'll plow through a presentation that stops on a lot of different things, and then be happy to take Q&A on any topic, no matter what, relevant to the presentation or otherwise. So I can do that, and then that. Robert, you should be seeing a presentation now.
I sure do.
Awesome. So we have started a company. It's a new startup. So we're in those early stages called Space Perspective. And the idea is to use a stratospheric balloon to go up to about 30 kilometers or 100,000 feet and give people a gentle ride to see this view. And we'll get back to this, but we thought we should start off with a little bit of the shoulders on which we stand. I think there's two sort of big points that I like to repeat. One is this is a team sport. All of these sort of big science and engineering endeavors are always huge team sports, and that we build on the work of people that came before us. So, astronomy, when I'm sure Robert talks about this a lot, one person made one discovery and somebody else used that discovery to discover something else. Well, the first humans in the stratosphere were Auguste Piccard and Paul Kuiper. Yes, this is who Star Trek Picard was named after, 1931. This is a cloth balloon with hydrogen, and they got just to the lower edge of the stratosphere, 51,000 feet. The stratosphere is where the air, it gets higher and higher, gets colder and colder. The stratosphere is where the air starts to warm back up again, and that's at about 50,000 foot, and a relatively small capsule. And then there was a series of flights in the 30s. This was around the World's Fair in 33. They got to 61,000 feet, again in these little spheres. And then Jeanette Piccard piloted with Auguste Piccard's brother, Jean, in 34. And this is the first woman to hit the stratosphere, going to 57,000 feet. Jump in, Jane.
Yes, okay. So just before you go to this, so what was cool is around this time, they were just getting to the altitude where they were beginning to see the curvature of the Earth. And in fact, the first people that saw the curvature of the Earth with their very own eyes did so in 1935. So it was actually the flight after this.
Those flights led to flights. Now we're jumping into the late 50s, and man-high flights were some of the first flights to test life support systems in really high altitude. These were a lot of the work that led to the Mercury flights. This is sort of the progenitor to those. And then I thought I'd show Project Stargazer. This was, I think, qualifies as the first sort of edge of space flight where humans did astronomy. And it flew a telescope, and you see the person on the right there is doing a whole series of astronomical observations at 81,000 feet. So we go all the way back there to doing astronomy at the edge of space.
So then this was a really audacious project. I'm completely blanking on his name, Joe Kittinger. So this is Colonel Joe Kittinger, who in the 60s set the world record for the highest skydive, space dive, you could call it. So I'm sure some of you saw Felix Baumgartner do this 40 years later. And this was Joe doing it then. And there was a really interesting thing that he experienced, and that people tended to experience when they went up to these very high altitudes, is they didn't want to come back down again. Literally did not want to come back down. And in fact, I think he had to be talked down because he wasn't going to jump. Not because he didn't want to jump, but because he didn't want to come back down.
It's called like a breakaway effect. And he famously told people in an earlier flight, I'm not coming down, come up and get me. And in fact, he titled a book that he wrote later about this whole incident, Come Up and Get Me. So this sort of takes us to the intersection with where we start to enter the picture. So, those were the flights that created the space program, and the space program really helped give us a view of the fact that we live on a relatively small planet, and the first pictures, of course, of the Earth from the moon really showed that, the famous Earthrise picture. And so the question came up, the Earth is a biosphere. Can one make an artificial biosphere? And could we use it for research and traveling throughout the solar system? So Buckminster Fuller in '82 essentially dared the Bass family and others, and Jane was there, to build the biosphere. He says, if you don't build it, who will? And so that was really the beginning of the Biosphere 2 project. And Jane was in charge of designing the agriculture. And I was in charge of the air and the water quality and sort of the chemistry of Biosphere 2. And Jane gave us plenty to eat, and I ran out of oxygen, but that's another story. This is us just going into the biosphere. That big dome contains a variable volume chamber that allows the air inside to expand and contract as it gets hot and cold.
So one of the really amazing experiences that we had whilst living inside Biosphere 2, which ties directly to why we're doing Space Perspective today, is the experience of being and experiencing being literally part of our biosphere. Obviously, we're in a sense part of our biosphere here on Biosphere 1, but the Earth is so big we don't feel that. Whereas in Biosphere 2, we absolutely felt that. We know every moment of every day that the plants around us were giving us our oxygen, and that we were breathing the same oxygen over and over again, that we were breathing out the CO2 that was growing our sweet potatoes, and we were eating so many sweet potatoes that we were turning orange, so we were becoming visibly part sweet potatoes. So there was like this whole interaction with our biosphere. And of course, we could see the edges of our biosphere, and we were painfully aware that what was in our biosphere was all we had. And by the way, it leaked less than the International Space Station while we were inside there. A little differently operated today. University of Arizona operates it, but then it was very leak-proof. It was very tight. And it turns out that that sort of experience of the oneness of our planet, that we're all living on this planet together, is very akin to the experience that astronauts have seeing Earth from space. You saw Chris Hadfield there looking out the window in that video earlier, and he waxes lyrical about seeing Earth from space. But it's more than just seeing it, it's experiencing it. And it's experiencing it as Spaceship Earth with this singular human family that we live together on this Spaceship Earth, hurtling through space together. And so in many ways, this experience that we had in the biosphere laid the foundation for what we're now doing today at Space Perspective.
Actually, when we came out, we managed to talk some people that were there for the medevac to take us in a helicopter to look over the biosphere so we could see our world from above, our entire world in one eye view. And so we had an experience very similar to what astronauts have, where they go to space and see the entire world. But we got to go up in a helicopter and see our entire world. Speaking of space, after Biosphere 2, we had a lot of questions about the chemistry of how Biosphere 2 worked. Jane did a lot of design work figuring out how to make a little tiny biosphere that was aquatic. We had an opportunity to send those to the Mir Space Station and to ISS.
And what was really cool, so here is Yuri. He's just taken it out of the Progress vehicle, and it was completely self-sustaining, so it's totally sealed, and it was just surviving on the light and ambient temperature that was inside the Zvezda module of the International Space Station. And what was really cool was that we bred the first animals to go through multiple life cycles in space. Lots more on the science on that, but it was certainly a great early experiment in closed systems in space.
That was a project done by a company that we started actually while we were inside Biosphere 2. And the rest of that company was to really specialize in life support and environmental control, which is controlling the environment inside a spacecraft. That company is doing great right now. It's actually one of its big projects is at the center there. It's the project going back to the moon called Artemis. It has also done thermal control and life support for all the projects that you see surrounding it, Boeing's vehicle, the Orion vehicle. So it's going great guns, and it's really a technology and subsystem development company. One of the projects that it did is we started to think about taking people and tourists to the edge of space. Was called StratX, we'll go through this a little bit, but at the end of October in 2014, we set the human flight world record for ballooning, and it wasn't just enough to take him higher than anybody had ever been under a balloon, but we put him in a spacesuit and then let him go, and he supersonically skydived back to Earth. And just to demonstrate this whole timeline, in 1934, science and mechanics cover had pretty much exactly this idea. 22 miles up in this case. We were a bit more than that, but you get the idea. So we're always building on somebody else's ideas. And this is a fun picture of some of the testing from StratX.
Yeah, so you're not really going to see rollerblades on a spacesuit very often. I think this is one of a kind. And the reason that there are rollerblades on the front of that spacesuit and some guy just hanging out in sort of thin air there is because this was an airplane jump. And this was one of the first tests with Alan in his suit and, the ergonomics and how he was going to open up his suit. But it turned out that he had to get pushed out of the airplane. And the only way to push him out was to put wheels on his chest. So the team got really creative.
This is launching him on that flight. The balloon is standing almost 600 feet over his head in a bit of a breeze, and he gets launched for his just over 2-hour trip up to the edge of space.
And there is the whole balloon. So you can see the little tiny Alan at the bottom. And that rather large balloon that when it's fully inflated is almost the size of a football stadium. Pretty big, right? Yeah. Took him 2 hours to get up to the edge of space and fully inflate the balloon.
So that's all balloon from him all the way up. And we've just inflated the very tip of the balloon. It'll turn into a big ball. This is right before release. You can see through his face shield.
Well, you should talk about this. I mean, this is release.
This is releasing. So from left to right is the release, and what we're doing is deploying a stabilizing rod. Felix Baumgartner did the flight about 2 years before us. And when he did his flight, he spun. He was on his back spinning almost to where he became unconscious. And the result of the conclusion of that flight was that you had to have a way to stabilize yourself. And so we spent 2 years doing test jumps without a person, just an iron dummy, figuring out how to stabilize the free fall, the transonic free fall. And that's what that rod coming out the back does. And then he comes down to a landing under a parachute. And Robert wanted me to be sure I showed how good his landings were. We had this great idea that he would do this sort of pirouette and come to a skidding landing. And there was so much weight from the life support and power and oxygen systems that he just rolled along. And Alan's a little bit embarrassed at these landings, but this was
nothing he could do about it.
Yeah, it was weighted. But what was interesting about this for space exploration was we had one suit, and we did test after test out of airplane jump or low altitude balloon jumps. And we would dust the suit off and fix it up and repair it. And the next morning, we'd go use that same suit again. And then we'd do this to it, and we'd go use that same suit again. Just like somebody doing science on Mars would be out there working in the suit and go back at the end of the day and fix up the suit and go use it again the next day. So this is actually one of the hardest environments a suit has ever been used in over and over and over again. And this was the team that did the flight, and the engineering team and the medical teams. So about half of this group of people is the engineers and technologists and technicians that made the system, and the other half are medics for the flight and pilots and like that for the actual jumps. But I put this up there because it shows what amazing things a small team can do. And it's really important, I think, that people realize what a strong, small team can really accomplish amazing things. And it's a joy to work in these small teams. So that's what that's there for.
So then on the heels of that, we kicked off Worldview, which is a balloon company And this uses these really sophisticated balloons that can effectively station keep. We discovered during StratX some winds between the troposphere and the stratosphere that go in all different directions. And it allows us, with very tight altitude control, to effectively sail the stratosphere, navigate the balloon. So that's really what the company is completely focused on.
So we took everything we learned in StratX, and we looked at what at the top center there is Felix Baumgartner's Red Bull jump and NASA's work, and at the bottom left is a cargo ballooning project we worked on a bit in Germany, and folded all that together to come up with a new sort of concept of operating for how you would do tourism.
Yeah, so and thus the whole concept of Space Perspective was born. And so this is a quick look at the flight profile that we'll be taking people on. We will initially be launching from Kennedy Space Center, and it will take about 2 hours to get up to the edge of space. For those who want to see a dark sky with enormously marvelous stars, we will, of course, be launching pre-dawn, right, Tabor? And get everybody up to altitude above the atmosphere. You're above 99% of the atmosphere, so it'll be incredible viewing. So we'll get up just before the sun rises, so you'll have time to see the sky as long as there's no moon up. And then the sun will rise. And if you've ever seen like some of the photos that Robert and his students have, and we've certainly taken video of sunrise from the stratosphere, it is ridiculous. It is amazing. So you'll see the sunrise, you'll be up there for an hour or two, and then you'll come back down on the balloon, you'll splash down part of the year in the Atlantic and then part of the year in the Gulf. We'll pick everybody up, the capsule and the balloon with a ship, and bring everybody ashore. That whole mission will be about 6 hours long initially. We anticipate getting it longer over time. I think people might want to stay up overnight. I can imagine a few people here might want to stay up overnight so they can look at stars all night long. It would be pretty cool.
So this is the vehicle we're calling Neptune, and it has seats for 8 passengers plus a pilot in a circle, all looking out through these big windows. And of course, all the engineers are nervous about engineering these big windows.
It'll be fine, right?
It'll be just fine. And the pointy bottom is because we'll splash down, and that helps attenuate the splash. So it's more of a dive down than a belly flop. Are
you saying that Crew Dragon does a belly flop, Tabor?
Yeah, pretty much. It's actually, for Crew Dragon, it's actually some of the defining loads for the vehicle are the splashdown. But as you can also see in the picture, it's meant to be a very accessible, very comfortable shirt sleeve environment. This isn't just something you have to train for. There isn't big G's. It's really meant to be the quintessential astronaut experience of looking out at the Earth.
And then, of course, from a scientific point of view, we also are going to have instrumentation on the outside. We'll have an area where we can put scientific instruments. And Robert, you'll be happy to know that we are already working with students to fly experiments. Just saying.
This is the layout. At the center is the necessary lavatory, and for those of proper age, there'll be a bar at the center. And you see the seats laid out in a circle there with the pilots. This is essentially how the current concept works.
And then this is the launch system. It's all very mobile. So you can see, unlike rocket flight, where these huge gantries, and I guess SpaceX is doing pretty well with the big aspects of what they're doing mobile, and some of the really small rockets now are getting more mobile. This is very mobile, which is pretty cool, which then also allows us to have this move to other parts of the world very easily.
Right now, we are working out of the shuttle landing facility and plan to do test launches early next year out of that facility. So it's an iconic big runway that allows us to easily lay out the balloon and flight train and get it all set for launch. And that's where we work out of every day now.
And you can just see the launch pad where Falcon Crew Dragon just launched this weekend on the right-hand side there. That left-hand picture.
This is taking off, and again, actually, that's 39B is right there at the end of right in the center of the picture at the top. So it's quite a fun place to be. It's a lot of amazing history here.
That's for sure.
And
yeah, I mean, I think we already talked about this. Did we mention that the balloon, when it's fully inflated, so this is the same size, roughly the same size as the balloon that we flew Alan with. So it too is the size that you can really pick up a football stadium and spin it around inside. And then between the balloon and the capsule is parachute, of course.
One of the reasons we're in Florida is because the stratosphere goes to the east part of the year and to the west part of the year. So being in a peninsula, we can splash down in the Atlantic part of the year and in the Gulf part of the year. So this is just looking down during descent back down through the clouds. And we'll get picked up by a ship, much the way the Dragon capsule gets picked up by a ship after splashing down. And that's the view we'll get. So that's
our story, I think. That's our story, and we're sticking with it. Robert, you're on mute.
That's incredible. I have to imagine, I only have a million questions, but I have to imagine that you have to do your testing without people in the capsule.
In fact, we want to do the testing without people in the capsule. It's a huge advantage. No, it really is. And I think one of the issues that, quite frankly, Virgin Galactic has is that they can't test fly without people on board.
Right.
And so it makes it very hard to test sort of corner cases. SpaceX had the advantage of the Cargo Dragon vehicle being prototype and the ability to fly it without people. So, of course, when they did the abort test earlier in the year, they obviously didn't have people on board, but they could test an emergency case, a corner case. They could see how the backup system worked. So we will do very much the same thing. We will intentionally destroy the balloon during the flight and make sure the parachutes all work and things like that you couldn't do with people on board. So the ability to flight test something without having people on board is really important and takes away a lot of the risk that we associate with test pilots, quite frankly, where you have to fly the plane.
Right. And where are you with testing right now? Where would you, just for, obviously we can't pin you down to a, first date that you're going to take human beings, but if you were guessing, what would you say tonight?
We're starting testing with a sub-mass but full-scale flight end of Q1 next year to test.
Very soon.
And Jane, you want to talk about the overall schedule?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So we're calling it Neptune 1. So it's the beginning of our flight test campaign. And it sort of will grow in fidelity as the team moves along. We're going to have our first test pilot flown vehicle flight around Q3 23. And then our first commercial flight will be December the 4th, 2024. Right, Tabor?
At 7:30 in the morning. You heard it here.
I write that down, yeah.
Buy your plane ticket now.
Right. That's fantastic. Well, let me ask you this. I'm assuming you would already, but it would seem like it would make sense that you would have, cameras already attached to the Neptune vehicle. That so, if somebody, paid for a flight, they would get all the views up and down with the flight, and then they can work on their own particular projects. Does that sound?
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in fact, we've been starting. All of this stuff sounds so easy, right? We'll just put a camera on it.
Yeah, right. No, I know.
Right? You know very well how hard this stuff is in the stratosphere. It never works the way you think it's going to work. So we're already starting with our early test flights. We actually use them. The engineers use GoPros for their flights to really track everything as part of their test program. But we're also on this very first flight that we're doing next year. We're flying several 360-degree cameras as well as more traditional 180 cameras, so that we can get some really amazing imagery.
Yeah, it's actually some of the very first development that we're doing is how to modify these cameras for thermal control, things like that. It's a very important part of all the testing to have cameras just everywhere. It's virtually impossible to do with sensors what you can do with a camera to show how a valve is working or how material is working. These balloons have almost 8 acres of balloon material that you're flying. Right?
I know, right?
Right. So you're if you want to know how that material is behaving and the like, you've got to fly cameras, and there's a lot of really tricky things to understand without piles of cameras.
Right. And Sean, do you have anything for everybody? I mean, I have a million questions if there's nothing coming in.
Yeah, we do have some questions. So shall I take some from the audience?
Yeah. If you want to.
The obvious question, I think a few people have this one, is what will the tickets cost?
Right, they're free.
Well, that was the second question. Are you planning to make it affordable?
Okay, so no, they're not free. Although we are actually working with different organizations, like, for example, Space for Humanity is one organization that we're working with, who is doing, I'm not going to say competitions per se, but it's sort of like a leadership program, and they're going to be flying people for free. People apply to their program. And I'm sure that we will do some sort of a few ticket giveaways as we go along so that we can include people who wouldn't otherwise be able to go in some ways. But we haven't set the ticket price. We're going to set them around Q1 or 2 next year. We think they're going to be around half the price of Virgin. We are still going to space. So that puts them somewhere in the region of 125,000.
And I guess an obvious follow-on to that is, do both of you plan to be on the first flight?
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, first of all, I want the test pilot to go and just make sure it works.
Yeah.
We have a bunch more questions. One, I'm not sure if this is a technical or philosophical or what, but why do you want to get humanity into our atmosphere?
Oh, that's a great question. And so I'll take a stab, and then I think Jane can jump in. So I think that we don't always make good decisions as humans if we don't have the right context and with which to make those decisions. And by context, in this case, I mean understanding that we're a population of people that are part of a complex, interrelated biological system that keeps everybody alive on this planet. And this is like the only planet we got. And it's a long way to find another one. I don't always think that good decisions are being made with that in mind. And so while we can see pictures of that, and you can take, Robert Black's astronomy course and understand that, I think having a visceral experience of it makes a big difference. And getting as many people in space as we can to have that visceral experience, I think helps transmit a very important aspect of understanding, that we live on a small planet and the ramifications of that. And you see that in astronauts. It's called the overview effect.
So it's really interesting when you, the overview effect is now just beginning to be quantified. I'll use the term quantified very loosely. How many astronauts have gone out now? 500 and something, almost 600. And most of them do experience this, what some call the overview effect. Frank White wrote about in the 80s, where it is exactly what Tabor. One aspect of it is that you see the Earth as, spaceship Earth, one human family, all of that stuff. What's really interesting about the experience is some of the research that's being done now is sort of looking at, well, does it really change behavior? Which is an interesting question. Just because I think a certain way, does it change my behavior? And yes, it does. So they looked at the kinds of things that astronauts did before they went up. How much did they get involved in environmental causes? How much did they get in social causes in their communities before and after? And there's a statistically significant difference. And people coming back from space tend to work more in their communities, work more in social programs, care more about the environment. So our job as a company is not to tell people how to think. But I do believe that we have the opportunity to give people this extraordinary experience of experiencing Earth in space. What they do with that experience is then up to them. There's also another aspect of it that I think is really interesting, as somebody who's a lifelong space enthusiast, Star Wars, Star Trek, the whole bit, right? We've all been working in the space community for so long. An aspect of finally going to Mars, going back to the moon, is public support. And the more that we have people going to space and understanding its relevance for us here on Earth and as a species, the more support we have and the more drive we have as a species to go beyond our own planet.
Thanks. That was a great answer to a difficult question. Here's some easier ones, technical ones.
Well, you can tell I've thought about that one quite a lot.
I'm sure. What material is the balloon made out of?
Yeah, that was pretty easy.
So the balloon is made of two different types of polyethylene. And polyethylene is great because it remains flexible and supple even when it gets really cold. At the edge of the stratosphere, the atmosphere is about minus 80 degrees C, so it's really cold. And we need that balloon to stay flexible as we go up through it and strong. So polyethylene is the answer.
Someone asks, they've noticed that they've had students who have had difficulty in airplanes because of turbulence. What will that be like inside the Neptune? Could you encounter turbulent weather?
No, so what's really fascinating is you're really going with the wind, so it's completely smooth. You really won't feel turbulent. You'll just go very gently the whole way.
And a couple of people have asked, how much of the globe will you actually see from your maximum elevation?
It will see about a 400-mile radius to the edge. So you'll be able to see, well across the Florida Peninsula into the Gulf or down to the Bahamas. So it's a 800-mile sort of edge-to-edge view.
Wow.
A few more technical questions. You've mentioned that once you're moving with the wind, obviously, it'll be a pretty smooth ride. What about launches themselves? Are there certain weather conditions that will cause problems with launch, and how often is that going to happen, especially in Florida?
We will try and avoid hurricanes.
Actually, that's a very insightful question. Because somebody essentially is realizing we're trying to launch 8 acres. And the problem is that while you're on the ground, the wind is moving, and you're stuck. So you have to wait to time it to a time when the winds are calm. And those occur more frequently than you might think, roughly 10%, 20% of the time. And that is often before dawn in the morning. So 2 or 3, 4 o'clock in the morning So that lines up nicely with a night launch, seeing the sunrise from the edge of space. And then coming down, of course, you have the splashdown, and we need to be sure we're splashing down at a time when the wind and swells aren't too bad.
Here's a good question. What can such voyages mean for future space endeavors?
Well, I think as Jane was saying, the more that people are part of space exploration, whether it's commercial flight tourism, the more we have people participating in it, I think the more we'll appreciate and support it. NASA, frankly, lacks public support. People rarely vote to keep the space program going. And understandably in some ways, but I also think, this is the kind of thing that cultures should do. Exploration, I think, is really fundamental and important, and science is important. And the more we can support that and create a community of people that have had an experience that's meaningful at the edge of space, I think it helps broaden all of our horizons, and all of that makes for a better education.
Yeah, and I'll just add also, I think from a very practical point of view as well, when you think about what Virgin's trying to do, or Axiom, and people going further. I mean, I think that there's several kinds of limitations on the number of people that want to go right now. It's not only the financial wherewithal to go, it's also rockets aren't for everyone. And so I think we serve as a bit of a gateway. People will go on our flight because it is going to be so accessible compared to a rocket ride. And once they've gone on ours, I think there'll be a group of people that will go, oh, well, I think I'll go a bit further now. And so we'll start to create sort of almost like a movement of people that have been to space and want to go further into space. And so we're really creating the people that will one day go to the moon and live on Mars.
That sort of leads to the next question. Do you have any plans to go further than the stratosphere?
I don't have plans, but I certainly have a wish. I'm very focused on getting up to above the atmosphere for right this moment. But I have dreamt of going to Mars for a very long time.
We did a fun program called Inspiration Mars, where we were working on a program to do a flyby of Mars with Dennis Tito was funding it, and we were trying to figure out how many people should go and how big the capsule should be, and reality started to set in. And we said, well, like the minimum is 2, just for safety's sake. You got to have somebody that can help somebody else. So 2 people's the minimum. So we said, okay, well, it's going to be 2. It clearly has to be a man and a woman. Then conversation continued on a bit more, and then the doctor said, well, because of radiation and all those other things, it really needs to be somebody, at least in their 50s. And then somebody else said, it's going to be a man and a woman, it'd be good if they were married, just, and then, by the time this whole conversation ended, everyone looked around at Jen and I and said, well, I guess we know who's going, don't we?
Yes, for like 6 months, Jane and Tabor were the couple going to Mars.
And then they said, well, they should have experience in isolation and confinement together already to prove that they're the right ones to go to Mars.
I guess that's right. By a process of elimination, there really weren't many other people on this planet that fit all of those parameters.
So NASA, if you're listening, we'll still go.
But one of the things that I really loved about the idea, there were some things that were kind of horrifying, but there were some things that were really amazing about the idea of doing a flyby of Mars. And one of them was to be the first humans to go and fly to Mars and then turn around and see Earth from that vantage point. And think about Earth as this place where all of human history has occurred. Everybody we know is there. All the life as we know it is there. That would be a crazy experience.
Yeah.
Maybe one of the students listening will have that opportunity.
Right. Absolutely.
Going back to the
first.
Going back to the biosphere, there's a question: what was it like to readjust to life after the biosphere?
Oh, that was fun.
Yeah, it was a bunch of things, but one of the things that we weren't expecting was how dependent you are on habits. There's the habit that puts the car keys back in your pocket, and there's the habit that puts the wallet back in your pocket or remembers where you put something. And we found that lacking these habits, because all our habits were different. They were, do I have my pruning shears and what's for dinner? I found myself forever trying to find the thing I misplaced and regaining all of those habits that sort of make your day go smoothly.
One of the things that was really cool, though, was coming out of Biosphere 2, it was, in many ways, a very simple life. And, I remember the very first day we went into a grocery store. And we walk into the store and we stand in front of this shelf that was full of bottles of tomato ketchup. And I remember thinking, oh my God, there's tomato ketchup. It's not only tomato ketchup, there's 17 brands of tomato ketchup. And then you walk over and there's all these pastries. And, I wanted to throw myself into the pastries and roll around in them. And then there were all these bottles of wine from all over the world. And, these cheeses from all over the world. And it suddenly made you realize and appreciate what an astoundingly abundant world we live in. Really. I mean, look, honestly, even now during this dreadful time of the pandemic, it's so easy to forget, the abundances that we do have. And it was one of the things that I was really reminded of. The flip side to that was, as we picked up these bottles of tomato ketchup and these other things in the grocery store, for the last 2 years, we had known exactly where all our food had come from. We'd grown it. We knew exactly what was in everything we ate. And all of a sudden, you look at these bottles, and not only do you know where anything came from, you don't even know what half the things are that is on the list listed on the bottle. And then when you're done, so when the night we came out of the Biosphere, we threw a big party in our house that we had built while we were in Biosphere, because, hey, why not? And so we had this big party, and the next morning we get up, and there's this gigantic pile of rubbish. What is this? Because for 2 years we hadn't had any garbage. We had recycled everything. So it was this really interesting sort of, reinsertion to the abundance and the waste that we have in our lives.
I mean, to put it in perspective, you can walk into a grocery store and take out, 2 weeks worth of food in an hour. It would take us 4 months to make a pizza. Because so you got to grow the wheat, and you got to milk the cow and make the cheese and all this stuff. So meal planning was quite the art. Jane was in charge of meal planning, and it was 6 months in advance. So you really understand what it takes to feed yourself.
Tabor, I think you mentioned during your discussion of the biosphere that there was an issue with the oxygen at some point. There's a question about exactly what that was.
Sure. So we were losing oxygen in a way we didn't understand because we were not increasing carbon dioxide. So when we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide, and it's about a ratio of 1-to-1 roughly. For every molecule of oxygen we use, we expel a molecule of carbon dioxide. So you would expect, and all life is about that way, you would expect that if we see oxygen falling, we would see carbon dioxide increasing at the exact same rate. What we were seeing in Biosphere 2 was the oxygen falling and the carbon dioxide staying pretty flat. So it was getting embarrassing. I was missing several tons of oxygen after about 8 months or so. And we were sort of running out of oxygen to breathe. And it turns out, to make a long story short, that what was happening was that we had put too much organic carbon in the soil of the biosphere. So new plant growth wasn't growing as fast as carbon dioxide was being produced by the soil. So that would produce the scenario that I started explaining, where oxygen is going down, carbon dioxide is going up. But somewhat serendipitously, along with all that organic carbon, we put in lots of concrete structure in the biosphere. And concrete is made of calcium and silicate hydroxide crystals. That's what makes concrete like a rock. But turns out that carbon dioxide can diffuse into concrete and make that calcium into calcium carbonate and act like a big CO2 scrubber. So what was happening was the microbes in the soil were munching on all that organic carbon in the soil, using oxygen, making carbon dioxide. Some of that carbon dioxide went to the plants, but the rest of it went into the concrete, to be locked up so the plants couldn't make it into oxygen.
But obviously you were able to.
When it came out of the biosphere and told that story to a bunch of people at NASA in a talk, a couple of people at the back of the room at the end of the talk raised their hand and said, "It's a really good thing you brought this up, because we were planning to make all our interiors for the moon base out of concrete."
Oh. Yeah.
We have lots more questions about the flight to the stratosphere as well. Somebody asked, can you repeat what the time frame was, how long the trip is, and how long you're at altitude and so on?
Oh yeah, so the first flight profile that we're going to do is about 6 hours. So it takes you roughly 2 hours to get up to the edge of space. So this is completely not like a rocket flight. You are going at 12 miles an hour to the edge of space. So you are going at a very moderate cycling speed to the edge of space. At which point we're now going up there for about 2 hours, and then about another 2 hours to come back down. So the whole thing is about 6 hours.
The interesting thing about that slow ascent, a lot of astronauts we've talked to have said part of that experience is getting a sense for how big the Earth is by seeing something on the ground like their ranch, that they know how big it is, and then comparing that to the curvature that they see of the Earth. What Alan Eustace said when we reported talking to him after he went up, said that because you're going up so slow, your mind can keep track of the scale change. So you see the pebbles on the ground, people's feet, people, the runway, the airport, the town, the landscape, the canyon, etc., over 2 hours. And by the time you get to where you're seeing the curvature of the Earth, you get how big the Earth is. Your brain can keep track of that scale change, and that's quite a significant experience.
Somebody else wonders whether there will be any age requirements, and I'm not sure if it's somebody my age thinking they might be too old, or somebody looking to see if their young son or daughter can go along.
So this is going to be, so think about this as if you could get on a plane ride, you could get onto Spaceship Neptune. That's how accessible we want to make it. So it doesn't appear to us that there really is an age limit on the high end. I mean, I suppose at some point there is, but generally not. However, on the lower end, we certainly want to be able for children to go. I think there will be an age below which we will not have children on there, but we haven't set the actual age yet.
How do you control where the balloon is going to splash down? Or do you?
Well, the trick is not to control where the balloon's going, but to predict where the balloon is going to go, so that you can put the recovery ship at the splashdown location. And that's done with some very complicated long pieces of software that model the ascent and descent rates of the balloon, and then that gets integrated into wind fields that the NOAA produces, or from weather balloons that we send up, so that we can reposition the recovery ship to put it in just the right place. So it's a matter of prediction rather than control.
Another question from one of the students is, what's the greatest challenge that you're currently facing in this quite complex project?
So we're in a very lucky position that we have sort of the basic technology is very proven. So the technology itself is not fundamentally a challenge. What hasn't really done before is what's called operationalizing it. That means, there's been those history flights we showed you, pictures of the flights at the beginning of the presentation. Those were one-offs. They're the kinds of thing that, take years to get ready, and then you all go out to the launch line and you do it once. Well, obviously, we have to do it again and again and again, and we have to do it very well and safely again and again and again. That's the challenge, is how we turn an industry that is known for doing these extraordinary singular feats and turn it into a routine flight to the edge of space.
There's a couple of questions sort of about maybe the economics of it. One is quite direct. Where is the funding from the project coming from?
Oh, yeah. No, that's great. So we are a Silicon Valley-backed, VC-backed company. Great. Is that the question? That's it, right?
No, that's good. Yeah. And along those lines, looking at a bit of the history, why did worldview change from space tourism to more science-oriented payloads?
So that was sort of a piece of serendipity. When we started the program, we and the scientific community believed that fundamentally the interface between the troposphere and the stratosphere, that's at that sort of 55,000 foot level, if they're going in different directions, they'll sort of go one direction and then the wind will just sort of stop and turn and go the other direction at that interface where the two are going. We happened to, with Alan Eustace's flight, during all the testing, need a very high data rate system for the descent because he was going supersonically down, and we just left it running for the ascent. So we happened to get some very detailed profiles of that layer between the troposphere and the stratosphere. And what we found was, rather than the wind's direction sort of changing, going the other direction, there was turbulence and swirl between these two layers, like a boundary layer turbulence. And in that turbulence, in that swirling, if you could very precisely control your altitude, you could use those swirls to navigate or stay in one place. And so the investors all said, and we all said, wow, we've sort of got one chance to do this before other people understand this property of the stratosphere. So we all said, let's go do an unmanned platform and learn from that before we go to do a manned platform, a human platform with crew, and take advantage of this interesting opportunity. So Worldview pivoted based on that data and developed a way of very precisely controlling the altitude of a payload carrying balloon for communications and remote sensing, things like that. Worldview continues to stay in that business, and so that's why we left that on, brought in a new CEO, and now we're doing this.
Are you guys good for a few more questions?
Sure.
Okay, we've still got some coming. Any possibility of being ready to fly for April 8th, 2024 solar eclipse?
Oh, boy.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, I wonder if, Tabor, I think maybe we need to go on that flight. So I think the answer to that is it is quite likely that we will have a flight going up. The question is, will it be a commercial flight yet? I think the answer is probably not.
That would be awesome.
But
along those lines, what kind of astrophotography do you think you can do from your platform? Will it be stable enough to put a telescope and a camera in there?
Oh yeah, this thing is really, really stable. So it was so it's not like a weather balloon, right? You've experienced weather balloons; they swing all over the place. These are really stable. In fact, one of the first times we sent the GoPro up under one of these big balloons, we thought the camera had broken because it was so stable. And so the kinds of arc pointing things that you can get for for stabilizing a normal telescope would work just fine, I would think.
Yeah, actually, Robert's been trying to ask a question here.
You know what? The question I have, and those are all the questions so far have been fantastic. So you guys are doing great without me. But I did notice that the worldview model kind of had you going up into the stratosphere and then parasailing, I think, if I'm saying it right, down. Now, do you keep the balloon and you just deflate it and you come down as a unit? Is that the descent model?
That's one of the big, Jane gets credit for this one, but that's one of the big differences. It was getting really hard to figure out how to safely develop that parafoil flight.
Gotcha.
Because you had to have people flying it. And that development process was required because when we're landing on land, we need to land on the right place on the land. And it was also just getting very hard to find good launch and landing locations appropriately situated to one another. So what we do is vent a bit of gas out of the balloon, and then it turns out to be self-regulating in the descent rate. As you go down, the gas compresses. And as I'm sure Robert has taught you all, as you compress gas, it heats and it wants to expand. So the faster we go down, the hotter the gas gets and it expands and slows you down. And if you slow down too much, now the gas cools off and contracts and lets you come down again. And so you often see actually in ballooning, your ascent rate will go down and slow and down and slow and down and slow because of this effect of sort of cyclically heating and cooling the gas.
Fascinating. Hey, I wanted to make one other point too on this eclipse coming up in 2024. You're going to have to travel because it starts in Coahuila, Mexico, goes through Texas, and then up through Maine. So I don't think
that's pretty perfect, actually.
Yeah, I don't know how. I don't know. Maybe you could find a place to splash down in Lake Michigan, or
Well, you could also. So that means it's going to go across the Caribbean, right?
No, Texas to Maine.
Across the Gulf.
I'm sorry, across the Gulf. So if you launched from like Brownsville, Texas, over the Gulf, could you see it?
Yes, if you can see 400 miles, sure. Yeah, but it's going to be right through central Texas. Our old stomping grounds will be on the edge of totality in the area. Just something to think about.
Right?
Florida's ideal, but if you want to see that one, you'll have to take your equipment on the road.
All right. Well, it's built for that.
All right.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
We have a few more biosphere questions. I think all of us remember the biosphere and, we're so intrigued by it. One question is, did the crew foresee the negative and positive impacts the biosphere experiment had on the participants' mental and physical health?
No.
Not all of them. We had a pretty good idea we were going to get skinny. But I don't think we had all anticipated the mentally challenging
Not at all.
it was.
I was very idealistic about what it was going to be like. We thought we had been trained because we were, it was kind of unorthodox training, but in a sense, pretty interesting. We were, I lived on a boat for a year. Tibby lived on the same ship for 2 years, which, you're out at sea, which is pretty remote. And then I lived in the outback of Australia for a year, which is one of the remote isolated places on the planet. Which is a certain analog, but where the analog breaks down is time. Because, when you're at sea, you come to shore every 2 to 3, maybe 4 weeks for a really long voyage. And so you blow off steam and then you go back out. So the issue is one of time. And it turns out that there is this, what's called isolated confined environment psychology that NASA has done a fair amount of studying with, because astronauts have experienced what they like to call behavioral health problems. And in the Antarctic, long expeditions. And there's a constellation of symptoms that occur. And certainly we experience some of them. And it turns out that 8 is the worst number we could have chosen. Because one of the symptoms, one of the things that tends to happen is groups in isolation tend to break into factions. And we broke into 2 factions of 4 and 4, 2 men and 2 women on each faction. And they're very stable. 4 on 4 is an incredibly stable break, shall we say. If it had been 7 or 9, it would have been very different dynamic. So no, I don't think we foresaw it. We should have, we could have, and there's lots of work that has been done in this area, and there's lots of work that can be done before people go to Mars to help prepare people and give them support during the mission as well. We didn't really have any support in that regard either. We had to get our own. So that was an area that was rather overlooked in many ways.
Could you see yourselves doing another biosphere stint ever, or was once?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we actually, I think we've talked about it quite a bit, and I think for a number of reasons. One of them is because as you think about, going for long duration space missions, a lot of work has been done on how we get there, how we land, sort of the initial thing that we live in. That's just going to, keep us alive, but not a lot of work has been done yet on how we truly live there. And ultimately, we're going to need something like a biosphere to truly live there. And so really not a lot of work has been done on that. Biosphere 2 remains now, even today. We were in there in 91. So even today, it is the most high fidelity prototype space base ever built. And so there's a lot of work to be done. So it would be super cool to continue that work, and actually really pertinent to what's going on the planet today. Because as we learn how to have self-sustaining ecosystems, self-sustaining biospheres, that teaches us a lot about how to live on planet Earth in a sustainable way.
Now, just a couple more questions here, if you guys are still up for it.
Sure.
Somebody asked, given acceptable weather conditions, what kind of turnaround could you have between flights? And do you reuse the same balloons? I assume you do.
We're not able to reuse the balloons. We have to make the balloons out of such thin material that they really don't survive. So gathering up on the water and packaging up. So we make a new balloon every time, but we do reuse the capsule. And that looks like it's about a 3.5 day or so turnaround. So the splashdown takes about a day to get back to the port. You can do some refurbishing in that. Another day to get back out to the launch pad and get ready, and a third day of sort of contingency. So we're looking at about 3 days to recycle the capsule, put a new balloon on it, and fly again.
And I have a question of my own. What does the pilot do?
Don't tell the pilot that he doesn't really need to do a whole lot, because we're going to be flying it from the ground. Right, Dave?
Okay, so there are some things that we won't design to be sort of repairable from the ground, some aspects of the life support system and carbon dioxide scrubber, things like that. So things that people need to have, if something went wrong, maybe there to fix that. Certainly there to manage the people's experience. And I'm sure there'll be a range of sort of emergency scenarios that the pilot will handle. But really, for the most part, we're going to test this vehicle without a pilot on board. And so the pilot becomes really a redundant way of controlling. But between automatic control and flying from the ground and the pilot, we end up with 3 very independent ways of controlling the flight.
How many people have already expressed interest in taking a flight? I assume quite a few.
Yeah, so I'm not going to tell you that number because we haven't published it yet, but it's a lot.
Good.
So when we, back in June, we announced the company to the world, and honestly, we didn't really know what to expect because, let's face it, we're in a pandemic. We were really pleasantly surprised that people found this really inspiring. And so we got a lot of media attention, but that also then drew people to our website where we were asking people to sign up to hold their place in line. And we've got huge response. So, yeah.
And I have one final question, which I'm going to generalize a little bit. You've already talked a little bit about the Mars trip and so on, but I'll just generalize to say, do you see, maybe not my generation, but certainly the students' generation, going out to planets, in particular Mars? Will we see habitation on Mars?
Well, I'm going to give the short answer, which is we surely better, because I've been waiting for this my entire adult life, and I thought we would be there a long time ago.
So it turns out not to be a technical question so much as an economic question. There are some big technical hurdles, but it's really, I think, going to be a commercial endeavor. Elon Musk and others and Jeff Bezos of Blue Origin talk about becoming a multi-planetary species or a multi-biosphere species. And I think that would be awesome, and I think there are probably commercial ways to make that happen. But we grew up, as I grew up, NASA had never failed to do anything. In the 80s, when Robert and I were in high school, NASA had succeeded at literally everything it touched. And it wasn't until the 90s and almost failed to do the space station because of mostly political will. And then a series of straight up, presidential and even congressional commitments to do Mars programs that were eventually shut down or failed in one way or another. So we're living in a time where a lot of people call us orphans of Apollo. There's actually even a movie called Orphans of Apollo. The people who thought that level of cadence of space exploration would continue. And so now it's clear that governments aren't going to do it. But I think that commercial space could do that. And part of what we're doing is essentially creating sort of the economic foundation of that. You'd have to have a lot of people that want to go in order to get enough people that can go to make it economically viable to commercially go to Mars.
Well, thank you. That's the last of the questions on the webinar, and I'll turn it back to Robert. But first, I want to thank both of you for being here, a great presentation, and answering all of these questions. It's really been an interesting discussion. So
it's certainly our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you for inviting us. This has been fun.
I'll turn it back to Robert.
Now, all I have to say is thank you, Sean. Thank you for all the questions. They were fantastic. All the attendees, thank you so much. And Tabor and Jane, what a pleasure to have you in our computers. This is amazing. So, yeah, it's the next best thing to be in there, right? So, thank you. I give you a standing ovation for everybody.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Stay in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Ciao.